It is no secret that the rich love to throw lavish parties. Representatives of the elite come to the luxurious house. Artists, officials, businessmen, and many other people. At one such event occurred acquaintance Bob Angleton and Doris. It turned out that the organizer of the feast is their mutual friend. At the time, Doris was 28 years old and Robert was 31, and both were married, each in his own marriage. However, this fact did not embarrass them. The guy behaved persistently, confidently, even on the verge of insolence. And this was very much liked by the relaxed and sociable girl, besides slightly intoxicated with expensive wine. The couple's relationship was developing rapidly. Doris and Bob spent a lot of time together and optimally complemented each other's missing qualities. She was sociable, had many acquaintances and friends. He, for the most part, limited himself to socializing with business associates, outside of work contact with someone quite rarely. In 1982, the couple got married. The wedding turned out gorgeous in accordance with the status of the bride and groom. 3 more years later, they had twin girls. Their parents named them Nikki and Ellie. Having concluded an official marriage, the newlyweds almost a week later moved to downtown Houston in the elite neighborhood of River Oaks. There were more than 3,000 luxury homes here. They were built after the economic breakthrough in the state, called the oil boom. At that time, many citizens, on whose plots were found sources of black gold, and those who invested in the oil industry, became rich. Premium cars, huge mansions, golf courses, and even a few helipads are typical of the area. To this day, the real estate here is purchased by representatives of the beau monde, including the stars of show business. Bob and Doris began their life in this neighborhood in 1982. In 1985, their family grew with the addition of twin daughters. Business was going great and steady. Dad and Mom had impressive profits. The children studied in a prestigious school. And so it continued until 1997. Having become the head of the family, the man made himself responsible for all financial components. And he created a superficial picture of a successful man with a well-developed legal business, his own tennis club and golf course with an elite clientele, a plot of land in Colorado, assets built up on real estate. In fact, all of the incoming cash flow was illegal, and Angleton's financial triumphs came from his bookmaking operation, and sports betting alone brought in $10 million a year, plus royalties on any bet. According to average estimates, such a law-abiding husband had a personal annual income as a bookie from $2 million. And no one could thoroughly determine what sums were at Bob's disposal, not even his spouse. Subsequently, it turned out that he more than once realized hidden financial transfers and machinations in which representatives of the mafia were involved. The external family idyll and prosperity turned out to be a picture for outsiders. Bob became more and more immersed in his business, devoting less time to his wife. He was often away. She was bored and found ecstasy in the AOL chat rooms. That's where she met her lover. He introduced himself to her as a broker for a successful stock exchange in New Jersey. Their connection quickly turned into a stormy romance. In the beginning of 1998, Doris demanded from her husband a divorce. Bob did not protest, and soon the marriage was officially dissolved. After that, the spouses still lived together for some time for the sake of the children. Then the ex-husband received limited time to stay together with Ellie and Nikki. For example, he would take his daughters to sports matches and bring them back. A pattern and schedule was established for him to spend time with them. On April 16th, Robert and his daughters attended a local softball game. At approximately 9:30 p.m., he brought them home. As he pulled up to the house, he noticed an open door. In addition, the dog did not run out to greet them. The man suspected something was wrong and called 911. He told the operator that he was afraid to go into the house with his daughters and that his wife was not responding to his call. Police arrived at the address 15 to 20 minutes later. Officers entered the house. Robert remained outside, and the daughters were in the car. Police officers found Doris's dead body in a narrow hallway going into the kitchen and a mass of scattered shell casings near her. The woman had been brutally murdered with multiple gunshots to her back and side. Experts later determined that Doris was hit by 13 bullets. The perpetrator had used 2 magazines or used 2 guns, or there were at least 2 perpetrators. Ammunition also complicated the investigation. All the bullets found were exploding bullets. Therefore, it was not possible to identify which weapon had fired them. During the initial search, the officers found no signs of robbery. The kitchen cabinets were closed, jewelry, money, and equipment in their places. In addition, on that fateful evening, for some reason, the alarm system with internal motion indicators did not go off. All the facts pointed to one thing. Doris herself was the target of the criminal, or criminals. Her murder had been done professionally, leaving no trace or evidence. The question remained, who prevented the mother, housewife, and socialite? The first suspect was her husband, but he was at the match with the children that night, providing himself an alibi for 100%. Of course, he could have hired a hitman, but this version turned out to be unprovable. And the subsequent investigation led the police to more than one dead end. After the incident, the sisters were immediately sent to a relative's home. Their father was summoned by the police for questioning at the station. So far, the terrible news was kept from the girls. For the police, Robert was the #1 suspect, as detectives primarily considered the domestic version a murder motivated by a family quarrel. And even a 100% alibi did not save the husband of the murdered woman from police suspicion. The officers asked Bob to detail the events of that evening in chronological order, and the algorithm he laid out came out as follows. At 7:45 p.m., he arrived at the stadium with the girls. Later, about 15 minutes later, Doris drove up to them. After 15-20 minutes, she left the sports facility and headed home to put on another outfit. The wife was supposed to return 10 minutes later, but she didn't. The match was over, and she was still gone. And no answer to her home phone calls. At about 9:10 p.m., Bob, worried, drove home. At about 9:30 p.m., he arrived at the house and saw the door open and called the police. The next stage in the interrogation is to voice suggestions as to the perpetrator of the murder, and possibly even the person who ordered it. Robert was at first confused by the dilemma, but then agreed to voice a few ideas, but only with the recorder turned off. The staff complied with such a simple request, and the interrogator admitted to working as a bookie. Such a position in Las Vegas would not have raised a question, but in Texas in the 1980s, it was illegitimate. The second fact revealed surprised the police even more. It turned out that Robert cooperates with the Department of Vice in the city of Houston and provides information about the work of other underground bookmakers. The man suggested that someone from the sphere of shady betting found out about his interaction with the police and took revenge on him by brutalizing his wife. Bob's testimony needed to be verified. Detectives contacted the former head of Vice, Kevin Tempton. He confirmed his cooperation with Angleton and the systematic receipt of valuable information from him on the gambling underground. Tempton added that because of regular snitching in the field of betting, Bob was not respected because of him created a risk of collapse of a profitable business. And Angleton was repeatedly threatened by colleagues. However, words remained words, and intimidation was not embodied. And in practice, the greatest danger to Robert was his own older brother, Roger, a difference of 6 years. In childhood and adolescence, they were quite close, and a little later, they had a joint business in Florida, a small family restaurant. However, the business did not thrive for long, and about 6 months later, the institution had to close due to losses. Then the brothers rushed to Texas. In this state, both achieved success, each in his own niche. Roger focused on real estate transactions, and Bob became interested in selling used cars. Gradually, the brotherly alliance was weakening, and money was to blame. Roger's business was falling apart because of low demand for apartments and modest houses, and mansions were sold by more successful realtors. At the same time, Robert went into the bookmaking business and offered his brother to work for him in such a lucrative field, albeit underground. Roger agreed, and gradually his life was getting better. However, his appetite grew and he demanded more and more fees. Bob was not satisfied with such arrangements, and he fired his arrogant brother. So their relationship was transformed into a feud. Roger gave an ultimatum: either he receives a payment of $250,000 or inform the police and the tax service about the shady bookmaking brother. Kevin Templeton even provided the police with a threatening letter, which allegedly Roger addressed to Robert. The essence of the appeal: payment of the specified amount by March 1997, otherwise severe measures will follow, by which we can mean various things, including murder. In addition, Angleton Sr. was experiencing serious health problems at the time and was heavily addicted to painkillers. He was on the edge of despair and admitted that he had nothing left to lose. On the day of Doris's death, there was a court hearing where Roger was supposed to appear and testify, but he never showed up in court. The reason for his absence was not clear, and this fact only increased the suspicions of the investigators. So, they audited all of Angleton Sr.'s credit card transactions. This audit revealed the following facts about Roger. He traveled to Texas several times in the 2 months before the tragic evening. 5 days before the murder, he rented an apartment in Houston. The day before Doris's death, he rented 2 cars and didn't return them, not even 2 weeks later. However, such behaviors did not yet make Roger a prime suspect in the murder. But one way or another, he had to be questioned, and he would explain the nature of that threatening letter and other nuances. Bob's older brother disappeared, which slowed down the investigation a bit. But when he escaped, he left obvious traces. Checking in at the Dallas airport for a flight to Houston under a false first and last name. The manager offered him an earlier flight on the condition that he forego baggage and take only carry-on luggage. 10 days after Doris's murder, he showed up in Las Vegas, where he married someone named Jennifer. In the same city, he tried to check into a hotel under false documents. Remarkably, at the airport security checkpoint, items claiming to be key evidence in the Doris murder case were found in his bag: a pair of .22 caliber handguns. Their bullets matched those found at the scene of the tragedy. Several wigs, hair dye, dark glasses, a compact tape recorder. After such finds, security showed special attention to Roger, but he somehow miraculously escaped from the airport, leaving there a bag with these things. When checking into a hotel in Las Vegas, the porter suspected something wrong and called the police. Roger was arrested for using a fake passport and driver's license. Also added to the charges was a felony for failing to appear in a California court. Basically, these are petty misdemeanors. And for them, he was booked into the Las Vegas County Jail. That's where Houston investigators found him. An important suspect was found. They also searched his hotel room. They found the following: cash totaling over $60,000, a notebook with codes to disable the alarm system at the Angleton house, detailed instructions for Doris's murder. For example, it included when to let the dog out of the house and when and how to shoot the victim and how to leave the scene. A receipt for the amount of money to be paid, a notebook with a plan of action in case Roger is caught, how to behave, what to say to the investigators, an audio tape of 2 men talking. The dialogue included a discussion of how to disable the alarm system and how to kill Doris and take the money from the house, and what to do to the dog if it barked loudly. The cops gave several $1,000 bills to the experts, and one bill had Robert Angleton's fingerprints on it. The quality of the audio was poor, and some of the phrases the detectives could hardly make out. Of the 2 voices on the tape, one belonged to Roger, and the other most likely to Bob. With this evidence in hand, investigators charged the Angleton brothers with first-degree murder in October 1997. The police were left in no doubt that the younger brother was the orderer and the older brother the perpetrator. It's no secret that Doris's relationship with Bob has deteriorated lately, plus he's been having an affair on the side. On April 11th, she turned 46 years old. On this occasion, a lavish party was organized. On it, Robert and Doris communicated quite closely and warmly, and their friends even suggested that the divorce was canceled. And 5 days later, the woman was murdered in her home. In the process of investigation, Experts found out that the dissolution of the marriage was not favorable to Bob, so would have revealed all his underground machinations, which would be interested in the tax service. That's the perfect motive to eliminate his wife. However, Robert did everything to show how he did not want to divorce. Sent Doris huge bouquets of flowers, love notes, invitations to a romantic trip, etc. He also stopped being jealous of her when he went somewhere without explanation, controlling her steps. All in all, visually, he became a model and compliant adorer. Doris, however, found her cherished freedom from her husband and allowed herself various intrigues on the side. On her life path, there was a new man with whom she saw her future. All of Robert's attempts to save the marriage failed, and in February 1997, the wife filed for divorce. Doris asked to divide their joint money stored in safes in 6 banks. Bob agreed. The spouses accumulated $3 million and distributed them to keep $500,000 each in 6 banks. During the investigation, detectives determined that the bookie had kept more safe deposit boxes containing serious sums and withheld it from his wife. When Doris received her $1.5 million, she hired a private accountant to handle the account. She had lost trust in her spouse and other men regarding the financial component, and the hired professional would help her control her expenses and income. The man's black streak was prolonged. He was foolishly caught at the airport and with false documents at the hotel. Such stresses could not help but take their toll on his already compromised health. His cardiovascular system left much to be desired. While in prison in Las Vegas, he repeatedly complained of heart pains and asked for necessary medications. However, he did not receive them in the right amount. He had a heart attack, and he was taken from prison under escort to a nearby hospital where he underwent emergency surgery. Before he'd recovered sufficiently, he was charged with the murder of Bob Angleton, and his condition deteriorated dramatically. Heart failure was killing the man, and to put himself out of his misery, he decided to commit suicide. The weapon of choice was a disposable razor. Roger's body was found by prison guards one morning, with wounds on his wrists. The autopsy confirmed previous medical diagnoses: serious heart failure. The man wouldn't have lived long with it, and any day could have been his last. No wonder the patient decided to take his own life. All of this happened before the trial, and the investigation lost its prime suspect. However, there were still questions about the second suspect. A suicide note was found next to Roger's body in the cell. In it, he assured that Robert was not involved in the death of his wife. It was a revenge killing by his older brother, and the other evidence was fabricated by the investigators. In researching Roger's last days, police discovered that he was in frequent contact with crime writer Vanessa Legault. Their dialogues were strictly confidential and lasted for hours. In them, the prisoner shared information about the plot to eliminate Doris. He told in detail all the facts with one condition: no publication of them for the end of the investigation and court hearings. Legault agreed to this barter, and the tapes of all their conversations were carefully boxed up, duct-taped in several turns, and hidden away. When Doris received her $1.5 million, she hired a private accountant to handle the account. She had lost trust in her spouse and other men regarding the financial component, and the hired professional would help her control her expenses and income. The only person left in the case is Bob Angleton. The state's most popular defense attorney, Mike Ramsey, took on his defense. The prosecutors built their case on the basis of that tape recording of 2 male voices discussing the murder. Technology at the time couldn't improve the quality of the tape, so they had to work with that sound. An independent acoustics and sound expert was brought in to identify the second speaker. The first was Roger. The expert determined that the probability of the voice belonging to Robert Angleton was 20%. This was not enough for the court because 100% was needed to build an ironclad conviction. At the time, the identity of the second participant in the dialogue from the recording remained unknown, but it was obvious that this person knew all the codes from the alarm system and the victim's detailed daily routine and where to lock the dog to avoid barking and noises. The investigation was never able to identify the culprit, and the reason for that was poor sound cleaning equipment, and many words of the mysterious interlocutor could not be understood. The defense brought in Bob's daughters as witnesses, who were 14 years old at the time. Ellie claimed that the second voice on the audio recording was making silly statements. After all, the whole family and their close friends knew that it was useless to lock the dog in the bathroom. The animal had learned to open the door in that room. Nikki added that the man whose voice was heard on the tape in the conversation with Roger expressed himself with an accent different from their father's vocabulary. Plus, it was a family tradition to name each room. And the mysterious stranger had mixed up all the names and locations of the rooms. Therefore, the girls were 100% sure that the recording was the voice of a man they did not know. The prosecution, however, claimed that it was Robert who had hired Roger to kill them. He cautiously entered the house and fired erratically with 2 handguns. And 13 bullets hit Doris. The defense responded with its own argument. Roger didn't show up at the house alone. There were 2 shooters, and they were traveling in 2 rental cars. And the voice on the audio recording is that of an accomplice in a terrible crime, but definitely not Robert Angleton. The lawyer also reminded the court that Roger had a weak psyche, was excessively fond of espionage and political intrigue. On the grounds of financial insolvency, large debts, and quarrel with his brother, he went to conspiracy and murder for revenge. And the evidence we've found that points to Robert is a clever fabrication, like the same bill with the prints on it. It could have been given to his brother by Bob much earlier for his work in the office. And the notes that were found, supposedly written by Robert, were left in the bag that was searched by the police. In addition, Roger had planted evidence on purpose, various false passports, things to change his appearance, receipts, and so on. That's what he admitted to in his suicide note. And the investigation had no direct evidence that the Angletons had made phone calls or sent letters to each other. The trial continued for 8 days. Then the jury deliberated for 4 days to reach a verdict. And their verdict was unanimous. Robert Angleton was not guilty of Doris's murder. However, the man became a figurehead in other cases. And for the next 2 years, the FBI filed a case against him for shady bookmaking, expecting that he would again engage in this activity. Also, the FBI planned to launch its own investigation into the murder of Doris Angleton. They brought in higher-level experts to transcribe the tape and used better technology to digitize the tape. And they would have gotten the case if they proved that Bob had hired Roger from out of state. But the defendants' activities were limited to Texas. The feds insisted on a reinvestigation and argued that they would have had full proof that the second voice belonged to Robert Angleton. The agents found out that Roger was in close contact with Vanessa Legault and paid her a visit. They demanded to know what information they had, but the writer refused to give the court the material. In response to this protest, she was imprisoned for 6 months. The woman served her time, but never provided the FBI with any records. The feds never obtained potential evidence against Robert for the murder of his wife. But they did get him on other charges: tax evasion, possession of a firearm. They seized more than $3.2 million from the defendant's safe deposit boxes and had no doubts about proving his guilt of illegitimate profiteering. However, Robert repaid the debt to the tax structure and went to wait for new court hearings. The feds believed that he would sit at home, but Angleton outsmarted them, took the money from their stashes and fake passports and rushed to the Netherlands. At the airport in Houston, he managed to board a plane, but at passport control in Amsterdam, experts figured out the fraud and the police arrested him. He was to be held in custody and await extradition to the U.S. The Dutch court scrupulously studied Angleton's case and ruled that the defendant could not be prosecuted a second time under the Article for Deprivation of Life. The basis for the verdict is the Double Jeopardy Act, and Robert's extradition to America meant that he would not be tried for murder in the States. And this would only be possible when he had served his due sentences for other crimes. It was September 2004, and Angleton was again caught failing to pay his taxes. He now owed $1.4 million. That's the amount of his earnings from acquittal to his second incarceration. He also recalled the use of a false passport on a flight to another country. Bob served 8 years for these acts and was released in 2012. Since then, the press lost interest in him, and his name was no longer in the newspapers. The federal prosecutor's office said that thanks to Angleton's extradition, a new case under a more serious article. Again, it involved murder. Allegedly, he killed someone a month after his release. Other charges were planned, but the cases never developed. Robert Angleton disappeared. His whereabouts became a mystery. According to some versions, he settled somewhere in Europe, most likely in Greece, since he had the right to obtain citizenship of this country on his father's side and knows the local language well.